think it's all about the bass, about the bass, about the bass. No treble.
Sing that again.
No. That's what I love about Queen. I mean, it's just those four guys going at it. 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 Lead guitar, bass, and drum, and like little keyboard. You keep adding too much to it, you just muddy up the waters. In my book, I like it simple. Little keyboard. Four guys going at it. Four guys going at it. Four guys going at it. I'm doing good point tonight. Four guys going at it. Four guys going at it. Four guys going at it. Four guys going at it.
You paid $2.
Do anything for love, but I won't do that.
Love you, Big Al.
I love you too. I enjoy four guys going at it.
Poor Al. You say one stupid thing one time, and someone comes along and immortalizes it forever. Oh, but he's a good sport about it. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Office Hours live stream. Another week, another Office Hours stream. I'm wearing my my new shirt from Dracula. It's got the Bela Lugosi on there. Pretty cool. It's a Five Below shirt, so it'll probably fall apart after I wash it a couple times, but pretty cool anyway. Okay, welcome. See, I think first, obviously, we had Ghost Planet Max Inc. Nathaniel Zalozball popping in. Welcome. Private Eye in Retrospectiva. Malwinus Cyrano. Good to see you. Imaginative Hobbyist. Stephen M. All of our usual suspects. Leia Plus Size. My dear sweet sound engraver. Happy October indeed. If only the weather would get cooler faster. Every year I have this complaint, especially where we live, which is like mid, US in terms of north-south, and it's still too warm, too long. But getting there. Welcome, Big Al popped in. Have a great stream. Appreciate it. Crystal Ashes, thank you very much for the super chat. Said I relate with the Wolfman in that thumbnail. Because you're alone or because you're a messy eater? Or because both? Yeah, I was trying to figure out what to do for a thumbnail. And I like the idea of using ChatGPT for those. I have no problem using AI for thumbnails and stuff like that. Of course, the best use of AI, as we've seen lately, is for trolling. That's just so perfect. So perfect. But I'm not an advocate of AI for use in like, this is my art, guys. Like, I would never sell you a print of that thumbnail that because I created that. No, I told ChatGPT to create it. AL, welcome. And who else is in here? Tom Spiegel, Electric Barbarella, Elf Runner, many more. So great to see you. Crystal Ashes says both. All right. Oops, keep that up there. So welcome. We are in October now, and I've been steadily moving, ahead with my look at this year at the evolution of those monster archetypes. So just to set the stage briefly again, I know you all here know that what I've been doing, but last year I looked at the history of like the origins, where it came from culturally and literarily, of these three major monster archetypes, Dracula, Frankenstein, and the Wolfman. And we started out by looking at cultural tensions, the French Revolution, all these kinds of things that built up. Of course, we spent a great deal of time on that magical weekend in the Swiss mountains there with Lord Byron, Mary Shelley, and Percy Shelley, and John Polidori as well, where all these kind of stories came about. And we talked, of course, about Mary Shelley's Frankenstein not ad nauseum, but at length. Bram Stoker's Dracula and Robert Louis Stevenson's Dr. Jekyll, Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, which is where the duality of man concept starts from. And in the Wolfman, you had some werewolf stories. We talked about Guy Endor's Werewolf of Paris, which really started out this idea. And then, of course, 1941's Universal's The Wolfman really took the idea of the werewolf, which sometimes was a part of the vampire mythos, certainly part of the Dracula mythos, but it has its own. It's actually the oldest of the. In terms of like folk beliefs, the werewolf is the oldest of the three because it dates back to like ancient witch trials. You know, it was kind of part of that thing. If you made a deal with the devil, you know, you change yourself into a wolf and terrorize the village and your enemies and so forth. So they took that old folk legend and really kind of blended it with Jekyll and Hyde and made it this beautiful thing that it is, which has become such a great archetype. The you know, even a man who's pure of heart and says his prayers by night can become a wolf when the wolfbane blooms and the autumn moon is bright. So that was really great. So we talked about that last year, and then this year so far we've been going through the evolution of those archetypes in our popular media, particularly in films, but we will mention books when something comes out. But again, I'm looking at the specific archetypes too. So, you know, vampires, for example, there's so many vampires. Stories have just branched out to be so many different things. And right now, anyway, I'm trying to stay centered on Dracula-centric stories. So that's what we're doing for that. Because, yeah, vampires are, you know, Frankenstein pretty much is always Frankenstein. Of course, you could branch out to zombies in general. Frankenstein's not really a zombie. I mean, you could make the argument that he is a dead corpse risen back to life, but he's more than that. He's a new life. He's not a walking dead. He's been granted a resurrection of sorts, but he's not a human being that was dead and is now alive. He's an amalgamation of old body parts into this new creation thing, you know, this new being. So it's it's its own fascinating thing. And then the Wolfman, of course, you can broaden that out to just about werewolf stories in general, because that, you know, there's no one. I mean, Lawrence Talbot, what a great character he is. But he didn't, you know, survive as the only, you know, werewolves that was being told, stories that were being told about, you know, for a long time. So it's good. We're going at Nathaniel Lowe's Paul, I put this on there, says, Professor Geek, just 3 monsters going at it. Well, they are the most seminal archetypes, right? I mean, they are the most 3 seminal monster archetypes we can think about. Big Al says, and still no residuals from my vocal stylings. If I was making any money on it, Big Al, I would cut you in, certainly. But I'm not. So yeah, we're going to talk about some. Last thing we left off was the wait, Mel Winus said from York. For some reason I read from New York. You said from York, 3 a.m. here, but I'm glad to catch you. Like, oh, great. Well, I'm glad you popped in. For some reason, I just, you know, being an American and everything centered around the U.S., I see York and I think New York. Sorry about that. But, Oha says, would Frankenstein count as a golem? The golem is certainly a part of the historical DNA of Frankenstein, but he himself isn't a golem. I think the golem has to be, you know, strictly speaking, it's the being that's called forth to defend the Jewish people, you know, in Jewish mysticism. You know, it's not part of like the actual Talmud or anything like that, but it's in Jewish mysticism and mystic texts. It was there, and that's what the great, you know, German silent film, you know, the Golem, as he came to be, you know, the movie that was created there. And we talked about those movies. Actually, you can go back and look at my playlist from last year. I need to add all the videos I've been doing this year to that playlist, but we talked about the one surviving movie, the Golem as he came to be, but there were 2 Golem films he did before that. So it was actually the end of a trilogy, because sadly so many of those great silent films are lost to us. But yeah, he's certainly part, because, you know, it's a creation of a being. So it's certainly in the DNA of his history. Definitely. Oh, Mel Winus is Germany here. Gotcha. Yeah, I'm really bad at counting time zones. I can't tell which region you are just by what time it is. That's my dyscalculia. Yeah. Probably not even that. I'm just bad at math on top of dyscalculia. So anyway, Before I get though, last we left off with talking about Hammer Horror's initial The Curse of Frankenstein and the Horror of Dracula, because that was the next big step. You know, we started out, of course, looking at the Universal movies and the how they established these monsters in the popular consciousness. And honestly, even though at some point we got to move on from the Universal monster movies, but you always come back to the Universal monster movies. I mean, those thumbnails. I was just been telling ChatGPT like last week. I said, show me a picture of Dracula, Frankenstein, and the werewolf playing a video game. And that's what it popped up. And if you look at that picture from last week, or even the thumbnail from this week, I didn't specify which Dracula, which Frankenstein, but it gives you the Boris Karloff Frankenstein, the Bela Lugosi Dracula. You know, it doesn't give you a Hammer Horror version of those characters. Now, that's not to degrade Hammer Horror's importance to the archetypes at all. That's why we're spending so much time on them, because they had an important effect on it too, and it's an important place in the history of the evolution of these archetypes. But it's always good to keep going back to the Universals, because that's it. I've mentioned this a lot, but I keep bringing it up because I think it's so fascinating that it was the late 90s, maybe early 2000s, or no, it was late 90s, but Burger King, for no reason at all, did a Halloween themed kids meal with the Universal monsters. And I've got the figures. I got them in the other room, but yeah, I've showed them off before. I've got the little Dracula that pops out of a coffin, which is the Bela Lugosi Dracula. I've got the Frankenstein. It comes out of this wooden box, and the werewolf and the creature from the Black Lagoon. And think about that. Late 90s, at the end of the century, these monsters were still recognizable enough and relevant enough, and kids were interested in them enough for them to suddenly be toys in a kids meal without any accompanying film. It wasn't like the Monster Squad, that was in the 80s, but it wasn't like a movie like that had come out, and these were tie-ins or anything. Just boom, because we just love these characters. We know these characters. There were the Universal Monster cookies. You can look at a lot of the 90s. If you look at Pepsi and Doritos, they had it's famous now because it was just such a fun campaign they did back in the day, but you can look in the commercials. I think this was 90s. It maybe did it a little bit into the aughts, but a whole, ad campaign with these monsters too. And I think that was a tie-in to Universal Studios with their horror nights or whatever. But it's just fascinating to me. And now Universal Studios is finally given the monsters their due and created their Universal Monsterland or whatever. I haven't been yet. And I haven't looked into it too thoroughly. I saw you guys talking about some of the things they've changed. And I know they've changed some things, like your Dr. Frankenstein at this point is of course a woman who's a descendant from Victor Frankenstein. I don't like changes like that at all. They're classic for a reason. They don't need to be adapted. Just nut up and give us the real deal. Like I hate this little concessions. I hate that. I absolutely hate that. Stop changing it. They survive for a reason. There's nothing racist about them. There's nothing sexist about them. They survived in the popular consciousness for a reason. And one of the reasons we don't get as much great content from them today, like all these things I'm listing off from the 90s, one of the reasons we don't get that today is because this cultural insecurity, we gotta update, we gotta change, we can't offend, it's shut up, just put it out there as it is. So we are going to talk about some more Hammer Horror, but really briefly first, I did read this week I Am Legend by Richard Matheson. I've been looking for some good Halloween reads that I haven't read yet, because I've read so many great novels for Halloween, of course, and I just reread Dracula and Something Wicked This Way Comes last year, so it's a little too soon for me to reread those. I think I read Frankenstein last year too, because I was talking about it so much. And Werewolf of Paris, I read that again last year. But Doug Brody, of course, you guys know my friend Doug Brody, who I've had on the channel. He was telling me, he recommended out of the blue Hell House by Richard Matheson, which I actually hadn't read yet either, and he was saying it's just one of the best haunted house books he'd ever read. And so I was like, all right, I'll put that on my list this year. But before that, a while ago, I had started reading I Am Legend by Matheson, and I never finished it. So I thought, well, yeah, I got to finish that first. I can't read one of his next books without finishing this first. So I finally got through I Am Legend. And I have started Hell House. And so far, Hell House is good. So far, Hell House is interesting, but I've really just started it. I'm just in the first few chapters of it, so I can't really, say anything about it. But the thing that I have to say about I Am Legend, I'm not really a big fan of that book at all. I'm not really a fan of the story at all. The only other book of Matheson I'd read before that was Somewhere in Time. Now, I tend to like a lot of Matheson's stories as they're translated for the screen. So the movie Somewhere in Time, or like the Twilight Zone episodes that he had written, a lot of the TV stuff the stuff that he had written for TV, I tend to like those a lot. And that's because the writer writes a script, but there are other people responsible for the story by the time it makes it on a broadcast. I mean, you've got directors changing the story to fit their vision. You've got producers chiming in. You've got the actors, portraying the characters in the way that they see fit, and so forth. And so after reading I Am Legend, I'm thinking, do I just not like Matheson's work? Just in general, I'll tell you why and what I didn't like about it. What I didn't like, the big thing I didn't like about both Somewhere in Time and I Am Legend, I do love the ideas. I love the concept. What a cool concept, both Somewhere in Time and I Am Legend. Man, that's great. And there were so many things about I Am Legend that I was really digging, like how this Robert Neville guy has eked out a new life in this sort of vampire apocalypse, how he's living day to day, and it's fascinating. And Matheson can get you completely invested in, like him finding the dog. You're like, oh, I want him to find the dog too. I want this to be okay and everything. And Matheson is a bit nihilistic, both Somewhere in Time and I Am Legend, just sort of like, oh, those hopes and dreams you just had, man, that didn't work out. And that's not a killer. If it's done for a reason, okay. And I don't quite get the ending of I Am Legend. It's like the whole book, that phrase I Am Legend, he utters it at the end, but it's like, okay, well, what does that even mean? You didn't really give me much of a breadcrumb trail to that. I get it. Change happens. I mean, you can look at some of the themes in the book. Change happens in civilizations, and new movements come along that you might other and think of them as monsters. But pretty soon, if time continues to march on and they become the norm, then you're going to be the monster. So I mean, I get that, but all of those little things I'm thinking about, okay, what's the book mean? What's its purpose? What is it really trying to say? I'm looking at the story itself thinking, is it worth it? Like, was it worth it to me to read all that just to get that meaning from it? I don't think so. The biggest mark I have against it, though, is Matheson cannot write a man. His men are so emotional, whiny little head cases. They are completely controlled by their emotions. They break down all the time into these emotional tirades, that hurts themselves or others, or just makes a spectacle of themselves. I'm like, man up, for crying out loud. Matheson, do you know what a real man is supposed to be like? And maybe this is just something for me and my taste. I can't abide being around, even in real life, I can't even abide being around a man who doesn't have control of his emotions, whether or not he's lashing out in anger all the time, or lashing out and crying all the time, or this is really upsets him and this and that. I'm not saying that a man has to be a block of wood and never ever emote. Hey, there are things in life that maybe you do cry about, or maybe you do this or that. I'm talking about those people, and we all know them, who are just emotional water balloons. They're just going to blubber over at any given point. Or self-loathing, or anger, or just breaking down and crying. I can't stand to be around that. I think that's a real disorder in a man. And again, I know some human beings are just going to be of a more emotional makeup than others. And, just looking at men in general, sure, some men will do that. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the men who cry all the time. I just lose so much respect for these people. Even people that I really do respect, like Father Mike Schmitz. I love Father Mike Schmitz. He's a wonderful Catholic priest. He's got a great ministry, but that dude will start crying. And I as soon as I hear his voice catch, I next video, skip ahead. I can't deal with this, man. Stop it. I just don't get. I can talk about my daughter's brain surgery, and I'm not going to choke up and cry. I can talk about, I don't get that. man up, come on. And if you've got something that you're constantly that's constantly triggering you and constantly pushing you to that edge over and over again, that's not just somebody who has more of an emotional makeup. That's somebody who's repressed their emotions. And see, that's not what I'm arguing for. I'm not saying you got to push all that down and never release it. Never. I'm not saying that at all, because when you push it all down and you never release it, that's when it comes up anytime, anywhere. And you start crying or get really angry if somebody said this because it triggered an inner wound that you had. No, those inner wounds, those things that you have, you got to take the horrible time and the horrible experience it is to feel them, to heal them, to process them, do what you need to do, go to therapy if that's what you need to do, but take care of your crap so you don't keep bubbling over and blubbering in public or whatever. That's what you do. You have to be a Sonny Craver said, I'm glad I'm the emotional one in the family. Yeah, and this doesn't count for women. Like I said, I'm talking about men. Men should be a little more, have it together a bit more, So anyway, Matheson's characters are like that. They're constantly somewhere in time. That dude, oh my gosh, I just wanted to give him a candy bar and a tampon and part ways with him. He was just ridiculous. He's always whining and crying. And Robert Neville is always going to these drunken binges and getting angry and mad at himself and just like, shut up, stop it. So far, Hell House, you got a mixture of characters. There's not one main character in Hell House. So you got a mixture of characters. And so far, I'm not really, it's a little bit better. There's 2 men and 2 women that are kind of our main 4 characters that we're following. So hopefully that'll be a better experience. But anyway, that's my thoughts about, and that's not like an analytical review I'm giving you. I'm just giving you my own personal experience with the book, what I liked about it, what I didn't like about it. So far, Matheson for me has been one of those people, kind of like a Grant Morrison. He has really cool ideas, and I love the ideas he has in some of the settings. But when it comes to execution, I'm just like, fail. That's just me. So yeah, that's me. Leia Plus Size, I just caught this. Oh, sorry, Ghost Planet Max Inc. I'll get you in a second. Leia Plus Size says, sadly, most writers today have male characters not in control of their emotions so much. Not a good message to send. I see it. I see it historically. I think it really came about in the 60s with the hippies, right? All of a sudden, every man had to be a James Taylor and in touch with their feelings, and that ebbed and swayed. I mean, you certainly had the more manly, manless characters that came out in the 80s and so forth, but that strain has been there all along. And somehow, you're more of a in touch person if you're, this and that or whatever. So yeah. I think I don't know what you were talking about there, Ghost Planet Maxine, but Ghost Planet Maxine talked about like autism stuff. Well, that's a different, whole different way. Like my daughter with her autism, it's the way I like to describe people is those on the autistic spectrum, and then you got the neurotypical people who are getting to the point where they're not all that typical anymore because autism is growing and growing and growing, but their neuro processes happen differently. So they're going to express emotions or lack thereof differently. It's just the way the brain works. So that's not really what I'm talking about either. I'm talking about, men of a neurotypical brain, dude, man up. Got some super chats here too. Crystal Ashes said Victor Frankenstein's only canon descendant should be Frederick Frankenstein. I did like Wolfgang Frankenstein because he had 2 brothers in the Universal Monsters, right? The one in Son of Frankenstein, which was great. And then Ghost of Frankenstein was the other brother. Of course, Ghost of Frankenstein was nowhere near the movie Son of Frankenstein is. So I got you there. Yeah. Imaginative Hobbyist, thank you for the super chat there. Said, fun fact, Arnold Schwarzenegger almost played Robert Neville in the 1990s version of I Am Legend. First, Sir Ridley Scott was to direct. I had no idea about that. That's pretty interesting. Yeah, I've never seen the Will Smith version. And I won't, because I just don't like Will Smith. Long before the whole slap and the Chris Rock thing, even in the 90s, when everybody was like, Will Smith is amazing, I just never got it. I'm not like against him. I don't have like vitriol against him. I just, I don't like his movies. He just seemed to me like all of the class clowns I went to middle school with. Like I didn't see what was so charismatic or what's so great about him. I did kind of see the same character over and over in all the movies. And it was it did tick me off that he was cast in everything for a while there. Like, I'm a huge Wild Wild West fan, you know, the old 60s show Wild West. Love it. And I was so mad when he was cast as West. And I was like, that's not Jim West. Come on, stop it. You know, and he did. He just came in with his cowboy hat. Yo, I'm a Will Smith thing. I'm like, oh, stop it. Imagine Hobby said, fun fact, Father Mike Schmitz was almost cast as Robin in Batman Forever. Yeah, I've heard him tell that story. It's pretty awesome. Like, that's pretty awesome. Yeah, my priest was almost Robin in Batman movie. Yeah, he was like, they had him do a bunch of takes and everything, and he was called back, but eventually they decided they wanted to go with Chris O'Donnell, a named actor, you know, somebody that could bring some name recognition in, even though Chris O'Donnell wasn't huge at the time. Yeah. All right. Yeah, I fully agree that I am in the minority. I understand that with Will Smith, old classic Will Smith. I know a lot of people now are turned off from his recent behavior and whatnot, but yeah, I fully accept the fact that I'm in the minority of people who are not really crazy about his classic days, but I just didn't get it. Yeah, Sound Graver said, I do appreciate Fresh Prince, though. See, I didn't do that either. I was like watching Fresh Prince, and I'm like, that's just a guy I go to school with. And I'm not even thinking about like one particular guy. That was just the people I went to school with. I'm like, what's so great about this? I don't get it. Not to say that the show wasn't smartly written, or, you know, some of the other characters, Carlton and stuff, you know, they're funny and stuff. So anyway. Okay, so that was I Am Legend. I just wanted to talk about that. If I can read, let me show this real quick. Hang on. Sorry, it took me a second to find this, but I wanted to find it to show you guys. Last year, I did a a review of Volume 1 of Dracula. Matt Kelly and, Kelly Jones and Matt Wagner. Two great, classic, iconic comic book writers and artists, Matt Wagner and Kelly Jones. I like just love a lot of their stuff, especially with Batman and the DC stuff they did. They worked on started working on a story of Dracula told from Dracula's perspective, because they said that's one thing we never really get. In the original novel, the epistolary novel, you never have writings or recordings of Dracula. You know, you have other people writing about what he said and what he did. So they did this. This was Volume 1. I've already did a whole review of it, and it's really great. It's I was expecting something a little more gothic, and it's not gothic. At least this first one wasn't. It was the ancient story of Vlad, you know, the Impaler, and the deal with the devil and all this really cool stuff that really gets his origin. And by the end of this volume, he's the vampire Dracula. And so it was really good. I liked it a lot. The Volume 2 just came, The Brides. I haven't read this yet, but I am going to read this and get a review for you guys, hopefully next week. So I'm really excited about this, The Brides. This is Volume 2, and they've already got a campaign open for Volume 3. So when I cut this out, maybe I do a little shorter, whatever promo of it, I'll put the link, but you can look up Orlok Press is what they're going to, like Count Orlok, like Nosferatu. Orlok Press is what they go under. You can do a search, Orlok Press. Volume 3 is out, and as part of the Volume 3 campaign, you can pick up copies of Volume 2 and Volume 1. So really excited about this. So gonna dig into that this week. Okay. Where was it? Okay, yeah. Let's talk about the Hammer horror stuff now. Let's start with Curse of Frankenstein, because as I said last time we talked about this, that was the first movie that came out for Hammer horror that really just, I mean, it did incredibly well. As I said before, the actors have said that the execs told them, Universal execs told them, because of course Hammer horror did it, but Universal distributed it in the United States, and they said that this movie helped them from going under, from going bankruptcy. And I pointed out that's the third time now that the monsters have helped Universal avoid bankruptcy. The Universal monsters certainly helped after the Depression, started with the Dracula, Frankenstein, all of that. Then it was when Abbott and Costello met the monsters, a new huge wave of success. And then with Hammer Horror, bringing back these monsters. So Curse of Frankenstein was so big. Of course, they greenlit to do a Dracula movie, but they made a deal with Universal distributors and whatnot for so many more movies for Hammer to make. And one of those movies was supposed to be a sequel to Curse of Frankenstein. So they had to get a sequel going. And in the Curse of Frankenstein, Christopher Lee, he did not want to be pigeonholed as this character. He didn't even want to come back as Dracula. We'll talk about that in a second, but they just constantly had to lure him back and back and back. But his deal about playing Frankenstein's monster in Curse of Frankenstein, which he did perfectly, we've already talked about that, was that, okay, the creature has to die or be destroyed in a way that he's not going to come back, because Christopher Lee didn't want to keep coming back as the creature. And at the end, he's, spoiler alert, he gets dropped in a vat of acid, which just, eats him up, disintegrates him. So there's no part of him that can be brought back as a Christopher Lee portrayed Frankenstein's monster. So Dr. Baron von Frankenstein, Peter Cushing's character, is the one who continues in the Frankenstein sequels, and that's what makes the Hammer Horror Frankenstein movies. Now, with these sequels, I'm only going to talk about them up to 1970, because for both Frankenstein and Dracula, by the time you reach 1970, they're doing something different with both of those franchises. We are going to talk about those, but for the sake of time-wise, I want to keep those to next week. Because for Frankenstein, they rebooted the original one. Then they came back and did another one with Peter Cushing. But that's all after 1970. And then by the time you get to the Dracula movies after 1970, it's Dracula AD, putting it in modern times and stuff like that. So we'll talk about that later, but I just want to talk about the sequels up to that point. Revenge of Frankenstein was the first Peter Cushing Frankenstein sequel, and it took place right off the end of Curse of Frankenstein. It's a true sequel. It's continuing the story, and we know at the end of Curse of Frankenstein, and you know this at the very beginning of Curse of Frankenstein, so it's not even a spoiler. The movie starts with him in jail, about to be guillotined. He's got the death penalty because of all this stuff that happened, and he calls forth this priest who would at least listen to his story and tell him the story, and he's going to try to, see, it wasn't really my fault or whatever. He's not even really confessing, because, as we said, Baron von Frankenstein, Victor Frankenstein in these movies, he's the real monster. Total sociopath. I mean, just evil guy. Completely has fun at the expense of others, and their pain is amusing to him. All he cares about is his work. All he cares about is the science. So at the very beginning of the Revenge of Frankenstein, that's true to form, right? And this is all the beginning of the movie. But he makes a deal with this like hunchback executioner, Carl, they said, I'll help you. I'll put your brain in a healthy body that's not hunchback if you help me survive this. So what do? They end up killing the priest. I think it's supposed to be the same priest from the first movie. And at the time when Baron von Frankenstein is supposed to be beheaded, no, they behead the priest instead and bury his body where Frankenstein's body should be buried. So that's pretty horrific. But my problem with the rest of the Revenge of the Frankenstein movie, it's a fun movie to watch, and it's got some really cool themes and whatnot. And I have this problem with the next three Frankenstein movies, really, is that Baron von Frankenstein isn't so much of a monster. Some movies have other monstrous people in it. Each movie has some sort of creature he's creating, but some of them aren't all that monstrous either. But he kind of loses his sociopathic, oh my gosh, this dude's evil. He kind of loses that. It's not until Frankenstein must be destroyed that he regains it. And he's like, oh, this dude is dark. But in Revenge of Frankenstein, he goes to this other village. Now, you don't even know how much of this plot involving killing the priest was even in Baron von Frankenstein's head. But it's what happens at the beginning. So you're like, okay, that's horrible. But after that, he goes to this village and he opens up a hospital for the poor. And all the while keeping his laboratory elsewhere with Carl, the hunchback, there to help him. And, other people, I won't give you the whole thing through, but he's putting together this body to put Carl's brain in and everything. I think Carl was probably, the name is probably a throwback to Dwight Fry's character from Bride of Frankenstein. He does, like at one point, he has to amputate a guy's arm, in the hospital that he runs for the poor. And of course, he takes the arm back to his laboratory because he's going to use that as raw materials. But they don't really spell it out. Like that would be pretty dark if he was in his hospital for the poor, if he was like needlessly amputating people's body parts or needlessly replacing or organ transplant or something like that so he could take them and gather, materials for his experiments. That would be really dark. But the movie doesn't even really show that. He's just so fixated on his work, and what his work is helping Carl. So he's like he's not a good guy, but he's not a monster in these movies. And in the first couple 2 or 3 movies, he's just not that bad of a guy. Again, not a good guy, not somebody you want to trust or but just not a horrible person. And the reason that's a problem is because if you're not going to make the creature super terrifying and super monstrous, and you're going to make Baron von Frankenstein the one be that. That's what the beauty of the Curse of Frankenstein movie was like. And then they just kind of dropped it. They just kind of trolled off of it. Revenge of Frankenstein is interesting, though, and noteworthy because it sets up this precedent, which is interesting. It's not really explored in some of the later movies, but I thought it was interesting nonetheless. But it doesn't matter what kind of body you put the brain in. The body is going to reflect however the brain thinks of itself. So the healthy, and again, spoiler alert, maybe just mute yourself if you don't want to hear this right there for Revenge of Frankenstein, but the perfect, healthy, upright body that he puts Carl's brain in, by the end ends up hunchback because Carl's brain is a hunchbacked brain, or whatever. That's the way he thinks of himself. And, he doesn't really stick to the healing regimen that Frankenstein gives for him anyway. So it's it was interesting. Now at the end of Revenge of Frankenstein, I did find it interesting that Frankenstein himself is mortally wounded. So his assistant Hans puts his brain in another body that Frankenstein has created there. And by the end, it's still Peter Cushing. So that's never really explained. Like, how did you get another body that looks exactly like you? But you see the scar, and so it could have been explained. They could have said, well, your brain knew that this is what you look like, so it sort of morphed your body. Or he could have extensively did some cosmetic surgery or whatever to make that body look like his. But then you'd probably see scars in the face. I don't know, kind of like Hush from Batman or something. But it was just an interesting concept that by the end of Revenge of Frankenstein, the doctor had become the creature. That's pretty fascinating. So Revenge of Frankenstein, interesting themes, interesting things going on. It's not a poorly done movie. It just drops the ball in what had made Curse of Frankenstein so interesting. So I thought that was weird. Next up, I think, was The Evil of Frankenstein, if I'm getting these right. This was an interesting one, but still, Baron von Frankenstein. It's just interesting to note, though, that after Revenge of Frankenstein, none of the Frankenstein movies are really true sequels. They don't take place or reference the exact events of the last movie. They're all just sort of thematic sequels. Like in Evil of Frankenstein, he goes back to the first village. And there's a Burgermeister who had stolen his stuff and all of this and that. They do use pretty much the first castle setting, but they don't really reference the actual events that happen. It's sort of a alternate universe sequel. That's what all the rest of the Frankenstein movies are, pretty much. The cool thing about Evil of Frankenstein, though, is that they had the rights at that point to actually use the universal likeness. So I think they got this like wrestler or whatever to come in and play the creature, and he looks a little bit more like the Universal with the bolts and the box head and everything. But the makeup's really bad, and it's one of the worst creatures. It's one of the worst Frankenstein monsters, actually, just because of like the makeup just wasn't good. I think they were trying to do something original and unique, even though they finally had the rights to go back and do the Boris Karloff. It was weird. I do like, though, about Evil of Frankenstein that suddenly the experiment that brings the monster to life is much more electric. It's much more lightning based. It's much more because they've got the rights to, kind of evoke some of that same imagery. In Curse of Frankenstein, and I like this about Curse of Frankenstein because they had to do something different. It's much more chemical based. You see all the chemicals in the tubes, and there's some electricity involved. They got the little generator thing going, but it's much more chemical based in the creatures in this sort of vat of chemicals, and there's none of the cool like raised up to the roof, the cool stuff from the first one. But you get a little bit more of that in The Evil of Frankenstein. It's so ironically titled, though, The Evil of Frankenstein, because again, in this movie, Baron von Frankenstein isn't evil. He's 100% fixated on his work. He wants revenge on the police and the people who had taken his stuff and, banished him from the town. But there's a mesmerist, there's a circus mesmerist that comes in, and he has to have him help him tame his creature. He's the evil one. He's the one wanting to send the creature out to kill his enemies and all this kind of stuff. It's not Baron von Frankenstein. Baron von Frankenstein, he's kind to this mute woman, this mute girl that stays around the castle too. Again, he's not a good guy, but he's just not the evil sociopathic Baron von Frankenstein we met in The Curse of Frankenstein. So it's weird. But again, there's still interesting things about the movie make it worth watching if you're a Frankenstein fan. Jump to Frankenstein Created Woman, the next one. They did this series of photos, promotional photos for Frankenstein Created Woman, which makes you think this is going to be like a Bride of Frankenstein type movie or something. I mean, she's there like just wrapped, around her, breasts and pelvic, area. So she's like, practically naked, stepping off of the contraption, and he's there, holding her as his creation or something. And you're thinking, oh, all right, this is going to get the Hammer treatment. But those shots aren't even in the movie at all. The movie's actually a really interesting take. Again, Baron von Frankenstein isn't evil. He's just fixated on his work. It's almost like this movie doesn't even acknowledge that any of the earlier movies happened. It's like this is his first creation, this woman. But he's got this assistant. He's got two assistants, but he's got this young assistant who gets himself into trouble. He can't admit where he was when this murder happened because he was with this girl and he doesn't want to sully her honor or whatever. So he ends up being beheaded. And of course, they're like, well, he was our friend, so let's take his brain and bring him back to life, right? So and then his girlfriend, who he was with, kills herself, drowns herself. So they take her body and put his brain in her body. Really creepy, weird stuff. But it's done pretty interestingly. And the girl who plays the Frankenstein monster in this case, although she doesn't look like a monster, she just looks like a young girl. It's really creepy stuff going on about his voice in her head because she has his brain, and it's creepy. It's some cool stuff. There's really a lot of cool stuff in Frankenstein Created Woman. Yet again, though, this movie took it to the extent where Frankenstein's just not evil. He's just not an evil guy at all. At all. So that was a problem. It wasn't until the next movie, which was Frankenstein Must Be Destroyed, the one that brought in Veronica Carlson. I think that was her first Hammer horror film. That returns us to an evil, sociopathic Baron von Frankenstein. I mean, he is evil in this one. He, which is why it's called Frankenstein Must Be Destroyed. He rapes a woman at one point. He's blackmailing these people into helping him. He's trying to bring this one guy's specific brain back just so he can get some information from him, and takes him away from his wife. He could have been helping to reunite him with his wife. No, just take him away. I mean, he's an evil dude in that. And he gets the ending is pretty wow, as it says, Frankenstein must be destroyed. So there's an ending that's like, oh wow, what happens there? And so it's good. It's a good return to form, for the character, which makes it a little bit more monstrous, makes it a better monster movie, I think. That's where I'm going to stop for the Frankenstein movies, though, because the next one was a remake of Curse of Frankenstein. Peter Cushing wasn't in that one. David Prowse actually played the Frankenstein's monster in that one, but we'll talk about that later. Then they did another one, Frankenstein versus the Monster. I forget the title of it there, but Peter Cushing came back in that one to kind of give his role a swan song there. So we'll talk about those later. But an interesting, look, if you look at how the imprint that Hammer Horror put on the character of Frankenstein, both Dr. Frankenstein and the creations that he made. It's an interesting one. It didn't take, meaning that other companies or other people that would go on to make Frankenstein movies always went back to the first story. They always went back to that first creation, the first creature, or the first novel. They never really ran with the idea of, well, let's just make Baron Frankenstein the main character. They didn't go with that. I was almost down to the edge of that bottom of that soda, so I grabbed another one. All right, yeah, Monster from Hell, Frankenstein and the Monster of Hell. You're right, Joel. That's the last in the series. So we'll talk about that and horror of Frankenstein next time. Crystal Ashes, thank you so much for the Professor Geek memberships. Appreciate that. Very much appreciated. And my dear Sound Engraver says, I like the theme of the body and mind being intricately linked. Yeah, I like that too. I thought that was really interesting. You're really fascinating because, I mean, no one's done an actual brain transplant. That's not a thing in real life. Don't know if they could ever actually do that. You think about, I mean, it gets into a lot of metaphysics, right? Where, especially if you believe in the existence of the soul or the spirit, is there a physical organ in which the soul or spirit resides? You would think the brain. So does that mean if you put your brain in another body, you would be you, but just in a different body? That's the science fiction, aspect that's usually taken. But I don't think it's that simple, of course, because you are your body and your soul and your spirit. It's a whole amalgamation, especially from a Christian or especially from a Catholic theological standpoint. So, Daniel Lozball said, I heard Peter Cushing was just as uncomfortable with filming that scene as Veronica Carlson was. Yeah, I was listening to a lot of interviews, and Peter Cushing, what a classy guy. I mean, it's a movie in was that 1970 or something like that? So you don't see it happening, but you see enough to know it is happening, right? And she said how he was just such a gentleman with her. He was married, of course, so he loved his wife dearly. There was never any kind of, oh, he was a man about the set, or anything like that. Everybody said what a gentleman he was. He and Christopher Lee, I've heard the same thing about both of them, especially in the later Dracula movies where they have to do these promotional shots and like all these, like in Dracula AD, there's all these girls, scantily clad girls, around Dracula for the promotional shots, but he's just being the gentleman there, So, yeah. Okay. Wondering if we have enough time to do the Draculas. Let's try. Well, I don't know. You know what I'm going to talk about instead of the Draculas? Because I don't know if I have enough time to do all those Dracula sequels justice. I will talk about, and I wanted to talk about this anyway. After they made Curse of Frankenstein and The Horror of Dracula, Hammer Horror did a Jekyll and Hyde film. They did The Two Faces of Dr. Jekyll. Now, this movie came out 1 year before The Curse of the Werewolf. So The Curse of the Werewolf came out in 1961. A great movie. It's the only film adaptation that I know of Guy Endor's Werewolf of Paris. It's not a perfect adaptation. They do change some things, but it's a really good movie. But before that, the 1 year before, they did The Two Faces of Dr. Jekyll. And the interesting thing about their take on The Two Faces of Dr. Jekyll, and I'm going to treat these movies, both The Two Faces of Dr. Jekyll and The Curse of the Werewolf, all dealing with the same archetype, because I know it's technically different monsters, Mr. Hyde versus the werewolf, but they're the same duality of man, foundational archetype that we've been treating it as. The Two Faces of Dr. Jekyll isn't a wonderful movie. It's not some perfect movie. The main character has to differentiate himself as Hyde and as Jekyll. So he's a little plastic when he's playing Jekyll. He's got a big fake beard on, and he's a little, because he's trying to be sort of non-emotive, because Hyde rather is the very emotive. The interesting thing about this is Mr. Hyde isn't some monstrous being. Mr. Hyde is this like more attractive gentleman, this more charismatic, younger looking gentleman, whereas Dr. Jekyll is the older kind of forlorn doctor. And the reason they do that is because in this movie, it's an interesting take. I don't like this. I'm not saying this should be the take on all good Jekyll and Hyde stories, but it's an interesting alteration, a little variation on it. Dr. Jekyll doesn't even believe in good and evil, really. He sees himself as more amoral. He's not a bad guy. He opens up his garden to, like deaf children to come and play in and whatnot. Um, he has a wife who he just totally neglects to the point where she's sleeping around on him with Christopher Lee. Christopher Lee has a great role in this movie. It's hilarious. But he's a really good actor. He's really great in the role. But Dr. Jekyll says within every personality, with every man's personality, there are two beings. He says one is man as he could be. And he says this is man is beyond good and evil. He's man as he could be. And what he means by that is that the man perfectly evolved, like the perfect highest evolution of man. And he doesn't really go into a lot of the specifics of what that is, but you could imagine, like in a lot of science fiction, they have like human beings evolve to the point where they've got telekinesis or stuff like that, just that kind of idea. They don't go into that specifics in this movie, but that's sort of the idea. Man as he could be, like a higher evolved being. So beyond good and evil. Good and evil have nothing to do with this, Jekyll says. Then he says, then the other man within human beings' personality is man as he would be, which again is beyond good and evil. It's just man as he would be, which is just what he would do if there were no moral restrictions or societal norms holding him back. Just man as he would be, completely given into his appetites. And the Dr. Jekyll in this movie is so short-sighted and so myopic that he doesn't realize that is actually evil. And by the end of it, he realizes that. The movie itself doesn't pretend that, well, there's no such thing as good and evil. No, by the end, the movie itself, Jekyll's lesson, he has to learn the lesson that, yeah, there's evil, and that man as he would be, just going out and taking whatever he wants, that's actually evil. That's bad. That's a bad thing. But he has to experiment with man as he would be before he can try to get to man as he could be. So that's why he brings forth Hyde first. And Hyde is an evil dude. I mean, he's very much a sociopathic, playful, rape scenes in this. Even rapes his own wife, or it's Jekyll's wife, but it's Hyde doing it. At the end, when he knows she's going to run away with Christopher Lee's character. It's dark stuff. And you've got the inner struggle, which is so interesting in this movie between, and just in the strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Hyde, the coolest things about that story is when the inner struggle starts to happen. Hyde starts to come out when Jekyll hasn't even drank the formula, and that's the inner struggle. If you feed the lesser man, if you feed the darker side of yourself, they're going to start coming out. That's going to start coming out in your personality. All these things you think you're doing in secret, even if no one finds out what you did in secret, they're going to learn that evil's within you, because the more you feed that your baser appetites, the more dominant they're going to be in your personality. It's a basic psychological truth and spiritual truth, Christian speaking. But it's really interestingly done, and Christopher Lee's great in the movie. So yeah, if you're a Jekyll and Hyde fan, don't sleep on Two Chases of Dr. Jekyll. It didn't do very well in the United States, and I think that's because there was no like monster spectacle. I mean, again, Hyde was just this like gentlest, this charismatic, attractive gentleman or whatever. So it didn't do as well, and they did Curse of Frankenstein next. but it's worth watching. It's worth watching. Let's see, where did I run off here? Nathaniel's Lowesball for $4.99. Thank you so much. Said I heard that Peter Cushing. Yeah, I read that. That's right. Alec Purdue said, wouldn't that be more Reanimator than Frankenstein? Reanimator was definitely a I don't know what you're asking that in reference to, but Reanimator was definitely coming from the DNA of Frankenstein, definitely, right? The same kind of concept. It's not a Frankenstein movie, but it's that playing with those themes, definitely. You say, better question. What separates Frankenstein from Reanimator? Which themes are more sci-fi? I think I'd have to rewatch Reanimator before I could really answer that question thoroughly for you, because it's been so long since I've seen it. But it's influenced by Frankenstein, definitely. It's kind of a product of its time. It's more 80s horror. Like you don't see Reanimator sequels reaching into today or anything like that. I'd have to rewatch it and really give you a better answer on that. Yeah, plus this, Jekyll and Hyde influences the Hulk, well, as does the Wolfman in general. I mean, the Hulk is very much a werewolf story in some ways, just not a wolf, a Hulk. But yeah, you're right. Trying to tap into that primal primal strength of man or whatever in Banner's experiments and stuff. The other before we wrapped on like 3 minutes here, but let me just say a couple more words about Curse of the Werewolf, which was the Hammer horror film done in 1950 or 61, I think. Just a great movie. It takes place. They set it in Spain for some reason instead of Paris, but the setting still works. And again, they took Guy Endor's Werewolf of Paris novel, which I think, again, if you want to talk about seminal literary works that you can trace these archetypes back to, you certainly can trace the Wolfman archetype back to The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. But I would always tuck in right next to it Guy Endor's Werewolf of Paris. Guy Endor's Werewolf of Paris was not, that's not taught in schools. It wasn't like some crazy popular book. Guy Endor was a screenwriter, and he wrote this novel well before the Wolfman came out, Universal's Wolfman came out. But it really does it bridges the gap. It takes the themes of Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde and puts them right into the werewolf mythos in a way that's so interesting. And it's not, it's subtly done. It's really fascinating though, but it ties into like French Revolution anxieties and everything. So you can't call yourself a werewolf fan if you haven't read Werewolf of Paris. It really is, it's just an important step in the evolution of the of the story. And it's so you got to watch Curse of the Werewolf because, like I said, it's the only film that even attempts to be an adaptation of it. Like I said, they changed the setting, but the time periods generally, it's still a period piece. It's just really good. Classic ending. I just recently watched, and I won't talk about this until next week because we're going to talk about the things after 1970, but I watched Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde, which was the Hammer horror film they did in the 70s there. And the ending of it was very evocative of the ending of Curse of the Werewolf. I was like, did they take this straight from Curse of the Werewolf? That was interesting. So I recommend Curse of the Werewolf as well. It's good stuff. What's his name? The actor in it, I can't remember. He was the heavy in the Oliver Twist movie too. He's been in a bunch of things. He did really well in it. All right, let me see here. Sound Engraver, my dear Sound Engraver says, I'm writing an alien character with the Frankenstein pathos. Yeah, she's been telling me about that. A hybrid between the doctor's emotions and the brutal makings of the creature. I mean, it's just, that's how you know. And I would love to write something one day that's so dense of DNA that people would want to take from and do other stories with. But that's why we're still talking about specifically the novel Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, and specifically the novel Bram Stoker's Dracula and Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, because these stories, these novels, however you think of them, they were so rich. They tapped into so much humanity, struggles of humanity, certainly societal issues and anxieties of the day, but a basic human struggles and anxieties and aspirations and whatever as well, that has carried them through the centuries, has carried them through so many different changes to society or changes in cultural norms or so forth. They're still relevant. And that's what's so fascinating. So you can take, and so many people have taken and written stories that evoke that same kind of idea or do it in a different way. It's fascinating. Yeah, I like it a lot. All right, I think I caught up with all of that. And I'm at my hour mark. And as you can hear, my throat is pretty scratchy. Kind of done talking. So I didn't get into the Dracula sequels today, but I covered a lot. Gave you some reviews. Talked about the Frankenstein sequels. And we still got at least like three streams before Halloween, right? Yep, we got 3 streams before Halloween. Unfortunately, this year, Sound Engraver and I are not going to be doing a live stream on Halloween. I've got Alyssa, my daughter, so we're going to be taking her trick-or-treating. And looking at the calendar, if the days that she's with us remains, it'll probably be another year or two of taking her trick-or-treating. And then because we get back late, and I would wake her up if I was doing a stream, so we usually go out and get a pizza from a really cool pizza place around the area and do trick-or-treating. And then we come back, and I usually watch some special horror movie that I saved that season just for that. Last year I saved Monster Squad for Halloween night. Previous years I've watched the Trick or Treat movie, which was great. I watched that on a Halloween night. I don't know what I'm going to watch this Halloween night. Might be something serious like a horror film, or it might be something more horror comedy like Transylvania 65000. I haven't seen that in ages. That's a great one. So I don't know. We'll see. Alyssa, I'd asked her, I said, what do you want to be for Halloween? And she said, Thumper Bunny. I was like, okay, well, she wants to be Thumper. All right. So I got her this costume of Thumper, and it was an expensive costume, like a head to toe bodysuit costume of Thumper. And I thought she's going to be excited. And I said, oh, look what I've got, Alyssa. And I take it out of the bag and I show it to her, and she goes, I want to be Ariel. Like, are you freaking kidding me? But then she decided that she wants to be Thumper with her mother. And Ariel, when she goes out, because her mother takes her to some trunk or treat kind of things or whatever in the month of October, building it up, when she has her on her days. So I was like, oh, okay, Ariel with me. So then I got waiting for a couple more things to come in the mail for Ariel costume, but we'll get that. So the joy of having kids, right? All right, well, that's all I got for tonight, guys. Thank you so much for hanging out. It's been a blast, as it always is. And yeah, you tell you one movie I might watch. There was an old film version of I Am Legend, The Last Man on Earth, I think it's called, which I haven't seen yet, and everybody says it's great. I might watch that. Again, I'm not interested in the Will Smith one because I'm just not a Will Smith fan. But I might watch that old version and see if that can improve upon the book for me. Anyway, we'll see. But yep, thank you guys so much. Yeah, Ariel in her human form, when she's in the blue dress. So I've got like the blue skirt, and I've got this blue dress kind of thing with the black, and then the bow, and I've got her little like fork bracelet to wear, and a little stuffed Sebastian and everything. So it'll go good. Thank you guys for hanging out. It's been a blast as always. And until next time, keep enjoying and digging deeper into the true blue monster stories you love. Thanks for watching.